Welcome to our video webcast. My name is Kevin Leidich, and I'm one of the pastoral ministers here at the Jesuit Retreat Center in Los Altos. In my previous webcasts, I presented the first two strategies that Jesus has given us when facing troubled times. The first is to allow Jesus to work for us, that is, to labor for us, to minister to us. And the second is to follow the example of Jesus and seek to serve others. The third strategy is to live in the Spirit dwelling within us. Have faith that Jesus remains with us through the Holy Spirit. In John 14, verse 18, states, "I will not leave you orphaned, but I will come back to you." Jesus always promises to remain with us, a pledge that is repeated frequently throughout chapters 14 and 15 of John's Gospel. Jesus strengthens us when we acknowledge that the promised Spirit is always with us. In John 14, verse 16 to 17, Jesus states, "I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you always, the Spirit of truth, which the world cannot accept, because it neither sees nor knows it. But you know it, because it remains with you and will be in you." Jesus calls us to welcome and cooperate with the Advocate. How do we recognize and cooperate with the Spirit in our lives? In John 14, verse 26 to 27, Jesus states, "The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, that the Father will send in my name, he will teach you everything and remind you of all that I've told you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid." We recognize the Spirit by the fruits of his teaching, and that fruit is always love. What Jesus tells us is significant. The purpose and direction of our lives is to live in love. It is through the experience of love that we encounter the Spirit. But Jesus warns us, "Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid." But what about the experience of fear and anxiety, when we always encounter experiences that cause fear and anxiety? A former student once posed this question to me by email several years ago. His two boys were in middle school at the time. He wrote, "I worry and fear for my sons, the choices they will be asked to make as they grow up, and the type of world they will encounter. Yet Jesus says over and over again in the Gospels, 'Do not be afraid, do not worry.' Am I going against the words of Jesus when I worry or when I'm fearful?" That's a very good question. My response was this, that fear and anxiety must be discerned concerning what spirit is the origin of the fear or worry. If the fear or worry is an expression of love or made out of love, then it is prompted by the Advocate, the Spirit of God. If the fear and anxiety has its origin in another spirit, a force that is contrary to God, for there are forces that go against God, that is, arises out of jealousy, envy, control, or competition, or any other motive or context that is contrary to love, then its origin is not rooted in the Advocate of God. Ignatius identified various forces that influence us by their effect, whether they lead us to faith, hope, and love, a movement called consolation, or distract us from faith, hope, and love, a movement called desolation. Consolation and desolation are movements, not feelings. And we're always encouraged to follow love, the direction that the Spirit guides us. As we face our troubled times, let us be strengthened by the belief that Jesus never abandons us, will never leave us orphaned, but will always remain with us through the Advocate. As your own reflection, I encourage you to reflect upon these questions. Do you trust in the Lord's promise that Jesus is sending the Advocate to minister to you? How do you experience the presence of the Advocate in your decision-making? How has the advocate specifically labored for you during your troubled times? Do you live according to your belief that the Spirit is dwelling within me? How am I called to calm my troubled heart, not be afraid, to set aside fears? Thank you for joining us today in this webcast.